Evan Carter had made a solemn promise to his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. No matter how thin their finances stretched or how difficult life became, Christmas would always hold the feeling of magic. So, on that frigid December evening, he had taken Lily to Wonderland Park, the sprawling amusement center situated on the outer limits of Portland, which flawlessly transformed itself into a shimmering winter fantasy every holiday season. The price of admission had been steep, costing him the entirety of a day's grueling wages earned at his construction job. Yet, the sight of Lily's small face upturned, her eyes widening into luminous pools at the towering, brilliantly lit Christmas tree and the ceaseless cascade of manufactured snow, validated every single hard-earned dollar. He had no way of anticipating that this particular night was destined to shatter their ordinary existence, that one simple, spontaneous act of profound human kindness would crash headlong into a powerful mother's deepest, most primitive fear, ultimately forcing open doors to a rarefied world he'd never even dared to imagine entering. The park itself pulsed with an almost frantic energy. Thousands of families moved through the elaborately decorated pathways, their joyous laughter mingling with the loud, slightly distorted Christmas carols blaring from speakers cunningly concealed within the festive shrubbery. Evan held Lily's small, mitten-clad hand tightly as they navigated the sheer density of the crowd, past the bustling vendors hawking steaming hot cocoa and warm, roasted chestnuts, past the dizzying, spinning teacups draped in countless twinkling lights, and past the impossibly long queues snaking inexorably toward Santa's highly coveted workshop. Lily tugged insistently on his arm, directing him toward the antique carousel, its magnificent painted horses frozen mid-leap, rising and falling rhythmically beneath a vast, glittering canopy of golden stars. They were barely halfway there when Evan felt a small, sudden impact against his leg. He looked down instinctively and found a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, desperately clutching his jeans with both tiny fists. Her face was streaked with salty tears, and her breathing came in ragged, alarming gasps. She wore what looked like an exceptionally expensive white wool coat with soft fur trim, but one of her patent leather shoes had come completely unbuckled, and her dark, glossy curls framed her tear-stained face in wild disarray. She gazed up at Evan with immense, dark brown eyes that were filled with an absolute, heart-stopping terror. "Hey! Hey!" Evan murmured, immediately dropping into a crouch. But the girl only intensified her crying, burying her face fiercely against his knee. Evan felt a sharp, familiar clench in his own heart. He recognized that specific kind of fear instantly, the gut-wrenching, primal panic of a small child who finds themselves utterly separated from their parent. He had witnessed that look once in Lily, years ago in a chaotic grocery store aisle, and the searing memory still surfaced to haunt him occasionally. Lily immediately knelt down beside him, her expression serious and composed, far beyond her 7 years. "It's all right," she said softly to the frightened child. "My daddy's really nice. He'll help you find your mommy." The girl lifted her head just slightly, her fierce sobs tapering off into shaky, shuddering hiccups. She looked directly at Lily, this other child who appeared so unervingly calm and certain, and something deep within her small body seemed to relax, just a fraction. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Evan asked, his voice low and infinitely gentle. "Sophie," the girl managed to whisper between shuddering breaths. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Evan, and this is my daughter, Lily. Can you tell me what your mommy looks like?" But Sophie's small face crumpled dramatically again. "I don't know where she went. There were so many people. And then she was gone and I couldn't find her. And I looked everywhere. And, okay. Evan said, his voice remaining impressively steady even as his analytical mind began to race. He quickly scanned the overwhelming crowd, searching desperately for anyone who seemed to be frantically searching for a lost child. The sea of faces was impossibly overwhelming. Families clustered together, romantic couples, rowdy groups of teenagers, all moving chaotically in different directions beneath the constant, artificial snowfall. Finding one specific person in this moving, vibrant chaos would be nearly impossible. "Let's go to the security station," he decided firmly. "They'll be able to help us find your mom faster than we can." He stood up and Sophie immediately reached up, her small hand instinctively gripping his. The gesture was completely automatic, trusting, and it caused a sharp ache deep within Evan's chest. He enveloped her small, cold fingers in his, noting how icy they were despite the expensive warmth of her coat. With Lily secured holding his other hand, he began pushing his way deliberately toward the main security office, located near the center of the park. The journey was slow and difficult. The crowd seemed to grow exponentially thicker with every single step, bodies pressing in on them from all sides. Sophie whimpered softly each time someone jostled past them, her grip on Evan's hand tightening almost to the point of pain. Without conscious thought, he swiftly lifted her onto his hip, the very same way he had carried Lily through countless crowds when she was smaller. Sophie immediately wrapped her arms tightly around his neck and buried her face against the familiar canvas of his shoulder. "We're almost there," he told her softly, stroking her tangled hair. "You're being so incredibly brave, Sophie." The security station itself was a small, deliberately charming building, meticulously designed to resemble a classic gingerbread house, complete with decorative candy cane columns and a thick, frosted roof. But the cheerfully deceptive exterior could do nothing to mask the palpable tension swirling inside. A long, anxious line of worried parents stretched out the door, each one desperately clutching photographs on their mobile phones, each one wearing the identical, heart-wrenching expression of barely contained panic. Evan felt Sophie tense visibly against him as she took in the scene. All these other lost children, all these other frightened families. Inside, two utterly exhausted-looking security guards were struggling to field demanding questions coming from multiple directions at once. Radios crackled relentlessly with garbled updates. A large whiteboard mounted on the wall listed concise descriptions of 6 different lost children, their last known locations marked precisely with color-coded pins on a massive map of the park. "Sir, we are genuinely doing our very best," one guard was patiently saying to a father who appeared moments away from tearing the small building apart. "We've got teams searching every dedicated section of the park." Evan waited his turn patiently, gently bouncing Sophie to maintain her calm. When he finally reached the counter, a young woman with a festive Santa hat precariously perched on her head looked up at him with weary eyes that had clearly seen far too many terrified children tonight. "Lost child?" she asked automatically, already reaching for a standard report form. "Found, actually," Evan corrected her gently. "Her name is Sophie. She got separated from her mother somewhere in the park and doesn't know exactly where she went." The guard's tired expression softened slightly. "Sophie, okay. Let me check our missing list." She scanned her computer screen, a small frown creasing her brow. "We don't have a missing child report yet for a Sophie. What does mom look like, honey?" Sophie just shook her head vehemently against Evan's shoulder, fresh, hot tears silently spilling down her cheeks. "She's pretty shaken up," Evan explained, his tone apologetic. "She hasn't been able to tell me much about her mother." The guard sighed heavily, rubbing her temples in obvious frustration. "Look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We are absolutely overwhelmed tonight. This is, hands down, our busiest event of the year, and we've had significantly more lost children than usual. We've got our teams out searching, but frankly, your best bet right now might be to stay in the main, high-traffic areas where parents typically circle back to look. The carousel, the big tree, the main merry-go-round. If you can keep her calm and highly visible in one of those spots, there's a very good chance her mom will find you before we manage to." It was definitely not the concrete answer Evan had desperately hoped for, but he instantly recognized the unfortunate reality of the situation. The park was vast, the crowd was monstrous, and there were only a limited number of security personnel available. He thanked the guard sincerely and stepped back outside. Sophie, still clinging to him desperately, acted as if he were the only solid, fixed object in a world that was violently spinning. "Daddy," Lily said, tugging earnestly on his sleeve, "maybe we should go to the merry-go-round. Sophie might feel better if she can watch the horses go around. And maybe her mommy will come there looking for her." Evan looked down at his daughter, at her honest, kind face and her profoundly good heart, and felt a swelling surge of pride so intense it nearly knocked him backward. "That's a truly wonderful idea. Sweetheart, let's go." The merry-go-round stood majestically at the geographical heart of the park, its antique, expertly carved horses gleaming brilliantly under thousands of minuscule white lights. The carousel itself was a genuine, historical antique, lovingly transported from Germany in the 1920s and painstakingly restored to its original, breathtaking glory. Each horse had been exquisitely hand-painted with intricate details, delicate flowers, flowing ribbons, and rich golden trim that caught the light perfectly with every rotation. A sizable crowd had gathered just to watch the spectacle, their faces softly illuminated by the gentle, revolving glow. Parents lifted children high onto their shoulders for a better vantage point. Couples held hands tightly as the music played its soft, lilting waltzes. Evan found a strategic spot near the entrance where they could clearly see and be easily seen, positioning them beneath a massive candy cane arch that would be difficult to miss from any distance. He lowered Sophie gently to the ground, keeping one reassuring hand firmly on her small shoulder to let her know unequivocally that he wasn't going anywhere. "Your mommy might come right here looking for you," he explained calmly. "So, we're going to stay exactly here where she can find us easily." "Okay." Sophie nodded silently, her tears finally starting to dry into rough trails on her cheeks. She watched the carousel spin, her small body slowly relaxing its tension against Evan's leg as the gentle, familiar music played on. Lily stood close beside her, happily pointing out the distinct horses, the pure white one with roses in its flowing mane, the sleek black one with polished golden hooves, the dappled gray with colorful ribbons streaming from its bridle. Sophie slowly began asking questions about each horse, her voice growing noticeably steadier with each query. After a long while, Evan lifted Sophie onto his broad shoulders so she could see even better and feel completely safe above the surrounding crowd. The little girl's hands gripped his hair gently as she gazed up at the spinning lights, and for one fleeting, beautiful moment, she seemed to entirely forget her recent, paralyzing fear. And somewhere across the park, a mother was utterly losing her mind. Alexandra Pierce had meticulously built a billion-dollar empire based entirely on her almost supernatural ability to remain utterly calm and ruthlessly decisive under unimaginable pressure. She had successfully negotiated hostile corporate takeovers without even breaking a sweat, faced down boardrooms full of predatory men who lived only to see her fail, and had single-handedly rebuilt her massive company from the brink of near bankruptcy after her husband's unexpected death left her with nothing but crushing debt and a 6-month-old daughter to protect. But none of that impressive history mattered now. None of her vast wealth, her staggering power, or her carefully cultivated, impenetrable composure meant a single thing in this moment because her daughter was inexplicably missing. She had merely turned away for 30 seconds. 30 agonizing seconds to answer an urgent, high-priority call from her assistant regarding a last-minute, unavoidable change to tomorrow's critical charity gala schedule. When she looked back down, Sophie was utterly gone. The dense, pulsating crowd had swallowed her daughter whole, and Alexandra's entire meticulously ordered world had instantly collapsed into a single, piercing point of screaming, raw terror. She searched everywhere frantically. She shoved aggressively through bewildered families, ignored the irritated, shocked looks sent her way, and screamed Sophie's name until her voice was raw and useless. Her personal security team, 2 burly men who usually maintained a discreet, professional distance, fanned out immediately across the park, communicating urgent updates through their earpieces. But the reports kept returning the same, devastating message. * no sign of her. No sign of her. No sign of her. 20 minutes crawled by. Then 30. Alexandra's legs were shaking uncontrollably. Her elegant designer heels felt completely inadequate and wildly inappropriate for this kind of desperate, frantic searching. She had inadvertently torn her expensive cashmere wrap on a fence post and hadn't even registered the damage. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose from its sophisticated pins, blonde strands falling stickily across her face as she ran blindly. Every blonde child she spotted made her heart violently seize up. And every single time it wasn't Sophie, she felt herself dying a little bit more inside. The dazzling Christmas lights that had seemed so wonderfully magical just an hour ago now felt like a cruel, twisted joke. Their cheerful, relentless twinkling seemed to mock her absolute terror. She thought back to every moment she'd been too preoccupied by work to simply play with Sophie. Every single bedtime story she had delegated to the night nanny. Every single promise she had carelessly broken because some meeting or deadline had, at the time, seemed so much more important. Every single school play she had missed because of a critical board meeting. If something happened to her daughter, she knew she would never, ever forgive herself. She would give up everything, her company, her entire fortune, her whole carefully constructed empire, just to have Sophie back safe and sound in her arms. When the call finally cut through her earpiece, slicing through the chaotic park noise, it was Marcus, her head of security. "Ma'am, we may have found her. Someone matching Sophie's description is near the merry-go-round." Alexandra was already running before the sentence finished. She burst through the crowd like a woman utterly possessed, roughly shoving aside anyone unfortunate enough to stand in her way. The merry-go-round finally came into view, its cheerful, repetitive music suddenly sounding like a mocking commentary on everything she was feeling. And then she saw them. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a decidedly worn canvas jacket. He had Sophie seated high upon his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair gently, and he was pointing up at something, the lights, perhaps, or the fine fake snow drifting down from the hidden machines. Sophie was smiling. She was actually smiling while Alexandra had been silently dying of fear. And this complete stranger had her daughter on his shoulders, as if he had every conceivable right to touch her child. Something primal snapped violently inside Alexandra. Every terrifying news story she had ever skimmed about child abductions. Every single warning about predators lurking in crowded public places. Every nightmare she'd suffered since becoming a mother. It all crashed together into a single, blinding, overwhelming wave of pure, unadulterated rage and terror. She didn't think. She just acted. "Get away from her!" Alexandra screamed, launching herself fiercely at the man. She grabbed Sophie, yanking her roughly off his shoulders with enough sudden force to make the child cry out sharply in startled pain. "Don't you dare touch her! Don't you ever touch my daughter!" The man stumbled backward awkwardly, his hands raised instantly in a universal gesture of surrender. He was trying to say something, his mouth moving rapidly, but Alexandra couldn't hear him over the deafening roar in her ears and the aggressively loud Christmas music blaring from the nearby speakers. Sophie was crying hard now, truly wailing. Alexandra clutched her so tightly she could feel the rapid, frantic flutter of her daughter's heartbeat against her own chest. A crowd was instantaneously forming around them, people holding their phones high, security guards pushing their way through, voices overlapping in a cacophony of confusion, curiosity, and accusation. Alexandra caught sight of the man's daughter, a little girl about Sophie's age, with neat braids, looking up at her with wide, genuinely frightened eyes. A distant, rational part of Alexandra's brain registered that this entire scene looked profoundly wrong, that something about this confrontation was terribly amiss. But she couldn't think past the overpowering, animal need to aggressively protect her child. "Ma'am, please calm down," a security guard was urgently saying. "Sir, can you please explain exactly what is happening here?" "I was helping her," the man, Evans said, his voice sounding remarkably steady despite the chaos swirling violently around them. "She was lost. We were waiting right here for her mother to find her." "Liar!" Alexandra spat, the accusation laced with poison. "You had her on your shoulders. You were obviously carrying her somewhere. I was showing her the lights on the tree. She was scared and I was trying to distract her while we waited for you." "Mommy, stop!" Sophie's small voice cut through the mounting noise, high and desperate, full of genuine distress. "Mommy, stop it. He helped me. He's nice. He and Lily helped me find you." Alexandra froze completely. She looked down at her daughter, at Sophie's tear-stained face, at the way she was reaching out hesitantly toward the stranger's little girl with one hand, even while she fiercely clung to Alexandra with the other. "What?" Alexandra whispered, the word hollow. "I got lost," Sophie said, her voice still trembling badly. "And I was so scared, Mommy. And then I found Evan and Lily, and they helped me. They took me to the security place, and then we came here so you could find me." Evan said you'd probably come here looking. He saved me, Mommy. He was saving me. The world abruptly shifted beneath Alexandra's expensive heels. She looked again at the man, Evan, and truly saw him for the very first time. The profound kindness in his eyes, the immediately protective arm wrapped securely around his own daughter, the complete and total absence of any threat in his weary posture. He wasn't a predator. He was simply a father, a good father, who had done exactly what she would have wanted any decent person to do if they found a lost, terrified child. And she had just savagely attacked him in front of hundreds of onlookers. The shame struck her with the force of a physical blow. She opened her mouth to issue a proper apology, but the necessary words wouldn't come out. Her whole body was shaking violently now, the brutal adrenaline crash combining with the sheer horror of what she had done, making her feel like she might collapse right there onto the cold pavement. "I'm sorry," she finally managed, her voice barely audible over the remaining crowd noise. "I'm so sorry. I thought." "It's okay," Evan said gently, though his face was visibly pale and his daughter was pressed tightly against his leg, clearly frightened by the intensity of everything that had just happened. "You were scared. I understand that." But Alexandra found she couldn't accept his instant grace. Not yet. Not when she could still feel the stinging echo of her own terrible accusations ringing in her ears. Not when she could see the dozens of curious cell phones still pointed menacingly in her direction. She pulled Sophie closer, mumbled another inadequate apology, and hastily retreated into the dense crowd before she could possibly make things any worse. Her security team immediately flanked her, instantaneously creating a protective bubble of space as she rushed blindly back toward the exclusive VIP section of the park. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen Evan watching her retreating figure, his expression not one of anger or indignation, but one of deep, quiet sadness. The look of a man who understood fear intimately, who had perhaps felt that same crippling terror himself, and who bore her no ill will, despite the humiliating, terrible thing she had just done. 15 minutes later, Alexandra sat secluded in the private lounge reserved for the park's most lavish donors. Sophie was curled safely in her lap. Her hands had finally stopped their trembling. But the guilt had only solidified and grown stronger with each passing moment. She kept replaying the dreadful scene in her mind. The rough way she'd grabbed Sophie, the vile accusations she'd hurled, the genuine fear reflected in that little girl's eyes as she watched a strange woman attack her father. She thought about the kind of example she had just set for her own daughter, what Sophie must think of her volatility now. She had to make it right. She had absolutely no idea how, but she had to try. "Marcus," she said sharply to the head of her security team. "Find him." Marcus hesitated, a rare occurrence. "Ma'am, are you certain that's wise? After what just happened out there? I accused an innocent man of being a predator in front of hundreds of people." Alexandra cut him off, her voice tight with self-loathing. "I need to apologize properly. Find him." 20 minutes later, Evan and Lily stood profoundly uncomfortable at the entrance to the lush VIP lounge. Evan had attempted to clean himself up slightly, wiping the remnants of fake snow from his jacket, smoothing down his wind-tousled hair, but there was no masking the worn edges of his work clothes or the exhaustion etched deep in his eyes. He looked exactly like a good man who had inadvertently wandered into the wrong world entirely, and was fully aware of it. Alexandra rose instantly to meet them, Sophie sliding quietly off her lap to stand close beside her. The massive, flawlessly decorated Christmas tree behind them cast everything in a warm, impossibly golden glow, yet it did nothing to ease the chill of Alexandra's acute embarrassment. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I know I have no right whatsoever to ask anything of you after the horrific way I behaved." "You were scared," Evan repeated calmly, using the exact same words he'd used before. "Any parent would be. That doesn't excuse what I did." Alexandra took a deep, steadying breath, bracing herself. "I accused you of something monstrous. In public, in front of your daughter, in front of hundreds of strangers with their cameras out. There is no excuse for that kind of behavior." "I appreciate the apology," Evan said carefully, "but honestly, we're fine. You don't owe us anything else. Yes, I do. Alexandra glanced down at Sophie, who was staring at Lily with an undeniable, undisguised longing. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about your daughter since we got back here. Apparently, Lily was incredibly kind to her when she was so scared. Lily, who had been shyly hiding behind her father's leg, peered out cautiously. Sophie was really scared, she said simply. I didn't want her to be scared anymore. Alexandra felt a profound, unexpected shift in her chest, a softening she had not anticipated. She looked at this child in her worn, probably second-hand coat and her carefully braided hair, and she saw a deep, intrinsic kindness that had absolutely nothing to do with wealth or status or social position. A kindness that was simply an essential part of who this little girl fundamentally was. That was very sweet of you, Alexandra said softly, genuinely moved. Daddy says we should always help people when they're scared. Lily added solemnly, reciting a cherished lesson, because someone might help us someday when we're scared, too. Alexandra's eyes moved to Evan. He looked genuinely embarrassed by his daughter's simple wisdom, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. But he didn't contradict her. He simply stood there, one reassuring hand resting on Lily's shoulder, radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity that Alexandra found unexpectedly moving. Your father sounds like a very wise man, she said, her voice sincere. He's the best daddy in the whole world, Lily declared with absolute, firm certainty. Sophie suddenly tugged urgently on Alexandra's hand. Mommy, can Lily come play with me? Please, I want to show her the special playground. Alexandra hesitated. She had only intended to apologize and allow them to leave, hoping to abruptly close this uncomfortable chapter and never be forced to think about it again. But Sophie's face was so completely hopeful, more animated than Alexandra had seen her in months. And Lily was looking back at Sophie with equal, undisguised eagerness. Of course, she heard herself say, the response surprising even herself. The next hour unfolded in ways Alexandra could never have possibly anticipated. She had expected perpetual awkwardness, stilted, painful conversation, two violently incompatible worlds uncomfortably colliding. Instead, she found herself quietly watching Sophie and Lily play together in the VIP area's meticulously designed private playground, while Evan sat quietly across from her at a table laden with extravagant refreshments he barely touched. The girls had become instant friends in the immediate, unguarded way only children can, bonding over shared games and whispered secrets, their laughter ringing out across the quiet lounge like the clear, unexpected chime of bells. Alexandra watched, mesmerized. She offered him compensation for his help, reaching for her wallet, listing options. A sizable check, a high-value gift card to a store she knew he could use, whatever he desired. He refused politely, maintaining eye contact, but his tone was firm, and the set of his jaw told her instantly that this was a boundary she should not cross. It wasn't simple pride that drove the refusal, though a trace of that was present in the uprightness of his posture. It was something profoundly deeper, a sturdy and unshakable sense of self that was entirely detached from external validation or material reward. In Alexandra's highly transactional world, every person had a price tag. Every executive, politician, or influential contact could ultimately be bought, influenced, or persuaded with the correct, precise combination of money and power. Evan seemed to operate entirely outside of that calculated calculus, and she found his existence both confusing and incredibly refreshing. It had been a very long time since she had met anyone who genuinely wanted nothing from her. Why did you help her? Alexandra heard herself asking, the question sharp and spontaneous. Sophie, you could have just taken her to security and left her there. That would have been more than enough. Evan considered the question, tilting his head slightly, his gaze drifting toward his daughter. Because she was scared, he said finally, his voice quiet but certain. And because I'd want someone, anyone, to do exactly the same thing for Lily if she ever got lost. Most people would have just walked away, assuming it wasn't their problem. I'm not most people. Alexandra studied him then, this man, a construction worker, judging by the fine layer of dust she now noticed on his canvas jacket. She looked at his hands, calloused and strong from honest labor, and his gentle, observant eyes, and thought of his daughter, Lily, who had called him the best daddy in the whole world with such absolute, unwavering conviction. He was nothing like the polished, aggressive men in her circle, with their expensive Italian suits and their cold, calculated kindnesses designed only to yield a return. He was real in a fundamental way that felt almost foreign, nearly forgotten, to her now. "No," she said quietly, accepting the profound truth of his statement. "You're not." The evening continued. Alexandra had initially been scheduled to attend a mandatory charity fundraiser in the park's ornate Grand Pavilion, a lavish gathering of Portland's elite, where charitable donations were ostentatiously measured in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and networking was subtly elevated into a brutal art form. She hadn't planned to bring any guests, but when the time came for them to leave the comfortable isolation of the VIP lounge, she found herself extending an impulsive invitation to Evan and Lily. "It's nothing too formal," she promised, a small lie slipping out, knowing that a gala fundraiser was inherently formal. Just a large gathering with some catered food and light entertainment. The girls seemed to be having such a wonderful time together. It would be a shame to cut it short. Evan looked genuinely uncertain, his protective reserve returning instantly. "I don't think we'd really fit in at something like that, Alexandra." "You'd be my guests?" she insisted, injecting a tone of finality into her voice. "That's all that matters." He glanced down at Lily, who was currently whispering conspiratorially with Sophie about some shared secret that had them both dissolving into suppressed giggles. The look on Evan's face, the raw, visceral love, the fierce desire to give his daughter every good thing in the world, even when he possessed so little himself, made Alexandra's heart ache in a complex way she couldn't articulate. "Okay," he conceded finally, after a long moment of internal debate. "But just for a little while." The charity event was precisely everything Alexandra had described, and more, elaborate, painfully exclusive, and filled wall-to-wall with people who measured human worth strictly in terms of net worth. Evan felt the stares the very moment he walked through the Grand Pavilion's entrance. His worn canvas jacket and work boots stood out starkly among the sea of designer silk gowns and gleaming Italian leather shoes. He saw the immediate raised eyebrows, the quick, practiced assessments, the whispered comments exchanged behind raised champagne flutes, all of which found him undeniably lacking. But Alexandra stayed right at his side, not hovering conspicuously, not making a dramatic show of protection, but simply present. It was a quiet, powerful declaration to the room that he belonged there because she had said he did. It was such a small, subtle thing, but it conveyed more respect and trust to Evan than she could possibly know. The evening progressed with the usual tiresome parade of stiff speeches, competitive silent auctions, and the kind of forced mingling that felt more like a calculated performance than a genuine human connection. Evan tried diligently to stay out of the way, keeping Lily securely close, watching with a mixture of amusement and respect as Sophie expertly charmed every wealthy adult who bent down to speak with her. The girl had clearly inherited her mother's compelling charisma. She moved through the densely packed crowd like she owned it, because in a very real sense she did. Then the crowd abruptly shifted, bodies pressing tightly together as some new, ephemeral attraction drew everyone's attention, and Sophie suddenly found herself separated from the cluster of adults. A large, oblivious man backed into her without looking, sending her small body stumbling violently. She reached out instinctively for something solid to steady herself and found only empty, swirling air. Evan moved, not with thought, but with pure, reflexive instinct. One moment he was standing beside a crystalline ice sculpture shaped like an abstract angel, and the next he was already across the room, his strong arms scooping Sophie up and pulling her safely against his chest before she could complete her fall. She clung to him instantly, her small fingers gripping the rough material of his jacket as the self-absorbed crowd swirled onward around them, heedless of the near incident. "You're okay," he assured her, his voice low, calm, and utterly steady. "I've got you." Alexandra had witnessed the entire sequence unfold. She had been mid-conversation with a powerful tech CEO when she caught the rapid movement out of the corner of her eye. The stumble, the desperate reach, and then Evan appearing from seemingly nowhere to catch her daughter. The sheer speed of his reaction, the surety and practiced economy of his movements, the way Sophie immediately relaxed and nestled into the safety of his arms. All of it spoke volumes about instincts honed by years of devoted, protective fatherhood, of a man who understood that safeguarding a child wasn't a matter of financial strength or status, but of constant, focused attention and unwavering care. She extracted herself quickly from the conversation and made her way through the throng to Evan's side. Sophie was already chattering excitedly about what had just happened, her brief moment of fear already forgotten in the retelling. "Thank you," Alexandra said to Evan, and this time, the words carried significantly more weight than simple polite social etiquette. "Just looking out for her," he replied easily. "Same as I'd want someone to do for Lily." There it was again, that simple, profound philosophy guiding every single action he took. "I could use some air," she said impulsively, needing to escape the suffocating performance of the event. "There's a small garden behind the pavilion. Would you join me?" The garden was an immediate oasis of quiet and unexpected calm amid the noisy chaos of the fundraiser. String lights were carefully woven through the bare winter branches of the trees, casting everything in a soft, ethereal golden glow. Alexandra led Evan to a secluded stone bench near a large, empty fountain that had been filled with twinkling luminarias. Sophie and Lily ran ahead instantly, playing some newly invented game that involved frantically chasing each other around the dormant flower beds and dissolving into uncontrolled, happy laughter every few seconds. "I never thanked you properly," Alexandra said, settling onto the cold stone. "Not just for tonight. For taking care of Sophie when she was truly lost earlier today. You already thanked me. You also accused me of kidnapping, and then you—" "Not quite the same thing," she finished, smiling slightly despite the tension. Evan almost smiled in return. Fair point. They watched their daughters play in comfortable silence for a moment. Alexandra noted how Evan tracked Lily's movements constantly without making it obvious. The deep patience evident in his posture, the faint lines around his gentle eyes that spoke equally of both easy laughter and constant worry. "Can I ask you something deeply personal?" she ventured. Lily's mother. A dark shadow briefly passed over Evan's rugged features. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry. It happened right around Christmas when it hit hard," he continued, pausing, watching Lily spin freely in circles with Sophie, their joy contrasting with his memory. "That's why I try so hard to make the holidays special now. I don't want Lily associating this time of year only with losing her mom. I want her to have happy, overwhelming memories, too." Alexandra thought about her own devastating loss, her husband Robert's sudden, brutal death, the agonizing, immediate requirement to rebuild her entire life while simultaneously caring for an infant daughter who would tragically never know her father. Sophie's father died when she was 6 months old. She heard herself confessing, the words feeling foreign yet right. A massive heart attack at 34. Completely unexpected. I barely remember that first year afterward. Running a major company, raising a baby alone, trying desperately not to fall apart in front of the world. "You're still here," Evan pointed out simply. "That counts for something significant." "I'm a successful businesswoman," Alexandra stated, rubbing her chilled hands together. "I'm not always sure I'm a good mother. You panicked when you thought Sophie was in danger earlier today. That's not bad parenting," Evan countered softly. "It's someone who lost control because she loves her daughter more than anything in the world." He paused again, his gaze searching hers in the soft lamplight. "My wife used to say, being broken doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you've been through something hard." Alexandra looked at him, this stranger with his worn jacket, who seemed to possess more profound insight into her guarded heart than people she had known professionally for decades. The girls came running back then, breathless and giggling, demanding attention. The moment of deep vulnerability passed, but something had irrevocably shifted between Evan and Alexandra. A silent, unexpected door had opened that neither of them yet knew how to close. Much later, Alexandra overheard a conversation near the coat check. An event organizer, spotting Evan's solid, capable build, approached him about potential construction work with the foundation, large-scale projects involving affordable housing and new community centers. I appreciate the offer, genuinely, Evan was saying. But I can't take it. We pay very well. Competitive rates. The organizer insisted. It's not about the money. The timeline means working straight through Christmas. He stood taller, resolute. I promised my daughter I'd be there with her. Fully present. Surely one holiday. I told my daughter, Christmas, Daddy will always be there. Even if we're broke, I'll be there. I don't break promises to her. Alexandra stood frozen several feet away, her phone still in her hand, the words striking her with the force of a physical blow. She thought about Christmases she had missed entirely, or those she had only half attended, mentally composing urgent emails while Sophie opened her professionally selected presents. She thought about Sophie's sheer, unadulterated terror when she was lost earlier. Was that because Alexandra had inadvertently given her reasons over time to doubt that her mother would always reliably be there? She found Evan near the exit, gently helping Lily into her thin coat with its broken zipper. Despite the coat's condition, Lily looked up at her father as though he had single-handedly hung the moon in the night sky for her. And Alexandra suddenly understood with visceral clarity that there were kinds of wealth that had absolutely nothing to do with money. Wait, Alexandra said, stepping forward. Sophie's school, the private one, has a spectacular winter program, enrichment activities, field trips, special classes. Sophie wants Lily to attend with her. I'd like to sponsor her enrollment, cover the entire cost. The warmth drained instantly from Evan's face, replaced by a cold, immediate defensiveness. You want to pay for my daughter's school? It's gratitude, Evan, not charity. It feels exactly like charity, he retorted, his eyes narrowed. Alexandra, do you think because I can't afford fancy private schools that I'm somehow failing Lily? That I'm not enough? That's not what I'm saying at all, she insisted, frustrated. Then what are you saying? They faced each other. The easy connection they had found in the garden suddenly erased, replaced by an enormous, yawning distance. Alexandra saw his pride, stiff and brittle, his instant defensiveness, the primal fear of every struggling parent, the terror of being seen as insufficient for your own child. Sophie made her first real friend tonight, Alexandra said slowly, carefully choosing her words. My daughter is desperately lonely. The kids at her school, they perform friendship instead of feeling it. This isn't about saving Lily, Evan. It's about helping Sophie. Then say that, he challenged, the words clipped. Don't try to dress it up like a philanthropic opportunity for your foundation. Fine, Alexandra admitted, letting her guard fall. I'm asking for help. Sophie needs a friend who is real. Will you please consider it? Before he could respond, two small, high-velocity bodies hurtled between them. Sophie had her arms clamped tightly around Lily's neck, both of them giggling maniacally. Are you fighting? Sophie asked worriedly, looking from one adult face to the other. No, sweetheart, Alexandra murmured. Lily tugged earnestly on her father's sleeve. Daddy, can I go to Sophie's school? She says they have horses. Evan looked down at his daughter's hopeful, shining face. Then he looked at Sophie, watching with equal intensity. Two small girls who had found each other in a crowd of thousands and had no intention of ever letting go. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. We'll talk about it, he said to Lily. To Alexandra he offered, I'll think about it. Not a yes, but significantly not a hard no. The park's seasonal fireworks started precisely at 10, great blooms of glittering color exploding silently across the cold winter sky. The sound muted until the delayed rumble reached the pavilion. Alexandra found Evan standing slightly apart from the crowd, Lily sound asleep, curled securely in his arms. She's worn out, he said quietly, gazing at the sparks above. Sophie too. She's already waiting in the car. Alexandra moved to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder. I wanted to apologize again for the school thing. You were right. You offered something incredibly generous, and I got defensive because I let my pride make it sound like charity. He shifted Lily's weight slightly. My wife always used to say, I'd rather drown than admit I need a lifeguard. A rocket burst overhead into a torrent of slow-motion golden sparks. Alexandra saw the deep weariness etched into Evan's face, the enormous weight he carried every single day without complaint. I wasn't lying about Sophie being lonely either, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Tonight was the first time I've seen her truly play in months. Because of Lily. Lily doesn't have many friends either. We move around a lot for work. So, maybe this isn't charity in either direction. Maybe it's just two girls who desperately need each other. Asterisk maybe. The finale built rapidly, the explosions coming faster, louder, brighter. I don't want you thinking I'm trying to buy my way out of the guilt of what happened earlier, Alexandra confessed. What I said to you in the park lounge was unforgivable. I already forgave you, Evan replied, his gaze still fixed on the display. Why? Because you were terrified for your daughter. I would have done the exact same thing. He finally turned to face her fully, his eyes steady in the flickering light. You're not a bad person, Alexandra. You're just a scared one like the rest of us. The words hit her with painful, liberating accuracy. She blinked, profoundly grateful that the darkness hid the sudden, stinging moisture in her eyes. Thank you for seeing me, she managed to say. Not just the billionaire or the woman who makes a scene. Just me. That's all anyone really wants, Evan observed. To be seen. The final firework exploded in a vast, hanging cascade of white and silver light before slowly fading into the blackness. Alexandra made a sudden, definitive decision. Have Christmas dinner with us, she offered, the invitation completely unrehearsed. You and Lily, at my house. Evan blinked, taken aback. What? No event. No guests, no networking, just four people who probably need each other more than they'll ever admit. Evan looked at her for a long moment, the quiet stretching between them. Alexandra, he said, his voice husky, tonight has been the most real thing that's happened to me in a very long time. I don't want it to end either. Lily stirred restlessly in his arms, murmuring something soft in her sleep. Okay. Evan agreed. We'll come. Alexandra's smile was like another firework, bright and sudden and breathtakingly beautiful. Christmas Day arrived, wrapped warmly in a mantle of fresh snow and pale winter sunshine. Alexandra's sprawling Victorian home had been entirely transformed by professional decorators into a pristine winter wonderland. With thick garlands draped over every banister and elegant battery-operated candles glowing in every window. But she had specifically asked the team to leave the massive dining room completely untouched. That single space she decorated herself with Sophie, spending the entire morning cutting out shapes from cheap construction paper and arguing lovingly over where each piece should go. Paper snowflakes hung crookedly from the expensive crystal chandelier, no two the same size or shape. A centerpiece composed of freshly cut pine boughs and red berries sat noticeably off-center on the mahogany table, arranged lovingly by Sophie's enthusiastic but inexperienced hands. It wasn't perfect by any objective professional standard. It was, however, infinitely better. Evan and Lily arrived precisely at 4 o'clock. Lily was clutching a handmade card she'd spent the entire morning creating. The little girl had meticulously drawn a picture of 4 stick people holding hands, some too big, some too small, standing under a garishly drawn Christmas tree, with carefully printed letters spelling out, "Thank you for being our friends." Across the top, she thrust it toward Sophie, who accepted it with squeals of pure delight and immediately dragged Lily upstairs to show her something deeply important. They'll be inseparable, Alexandra observed, watching them climb the stairs. For today, at least, maybe much longer. They cooked together. Actually together. Evan made his grandmother's rich stuffing while Alexandra tackled the complicated process of roasting potatoes. They bumped elbows, laughed easily at their combined incompetence in the kitchen, and ultimately produced something that was certainly edible, if far from gourmet perfection. The girls came down wearing matching tinsel crowns they had fashioned for each other, holding hands like they had been lifelong best friends. "This looks yummy," Sophie announced, eyeing the spread of dishes. "You haven't even tasted it yet," Evan warned her, spooning cranberry sauce onto his plate. Doesn't matter, Sophie declared with childish wisdom. It looks like love. Alexandra caught Evan's eye across the beautifully cluttered table. He smiled, completely unguarded and warm, and something deep inside her, something that had been tightly wounded for years, finally loosened. After dinner, they moved into the vast living room where a roaring fire crackled in the hearth, and the enormous tree glittered brilliantly. Sophie presented Evan with a small, carefully wrapped box with great ceremony. I made this because you saved me, she explained seriously. Inside was a bracelet woven from brightly colored thread with small plastic beads that spelled out HERO. Simple, imperfect, and intensely meaningful. I love it, Evan said, genuinely moved, immediately putting it on his wrist. Lily gave Sophie a simple drawing of two girls holding hands under a magnificent rainbow. That's us, Lily whispered. Best friends forever. Sophie clutched the drawing like it was solid gold. Alexandra watched the exchange, then spoke quietly to Evan. I've been thinking about what you said, about keeping promises, about always being there no matter what. I haven't been good at that with Sophie. I get so caught up in being Alexandra Pierce, the CEO, the public figure, and forget to just be Sophie's mom. You're a good mother, Evan insisted. I'm a busy mother. They are not always the same thing. She watched the firelight dance on Sophie's face. I want to be better. Then tell her. Show her. You said you were scared. Do it anyway. Such simple, deceptively difficult advice. Such terrifying advice. But Evan spoke it with such deep, quiet faith that Alexandra found herself believing it was entirely possible. When the girls finally fell asleep tangled together by the warmth of the fire, Alexandra and Evan sat watching the embers glow low. This is nice, Evan admitted, stretching luxuriously. I'd forgotten what family feels like. Multiple people, chaos, noise. Alexandra nodded slowly. I never really had this. Even when Robert was alive, Christmas was always meticulously catered. Perfect. She smiled. A genuine, private expression. This is better. Crooked snowflakes and lumpy potatoes. Love, Evan supplied. That's what Sophie said. Evan turned to face her, the firelight painting shadows across his features. What happens after tonight, Alexandra? I don't know, she admitted truthfully. But I'd very much like to find out. So would I. It wasn't a formal promise, just an honest acknowledgement that whatever strange, powerful connection had begun in that chaotic amusement park had grown into something robust and worth deeply exploring. Alexandra reached out and gently took his hand. His fingers were rough, strong, and warm despite the winter chill permeating the room. They sat there as the fire burned low, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, watching their daughters sleep peacefully, feeling a sense of renewed hope for the first time in years. Outside, the snow began falling softly again. Inside, the tree cast shifting, colored shadows across four people who had started the night as strangers and were ending it as something much more defined. Whatever came next, the inevitable challenges, the logistical complications, the bumps in the road caused by their vastly different worlds, they would face it together, or at least they had made the silent choice to try. Because sometimes the best gifts aren't carefully planned or purchased. Sometimes they find you when you least expect them. A frightened, lost child in a crowded park. A moment of chaos that could have ended in disaster, but instead ripped open a door to something beautiful. And the profound chance to discover that home isn't just a physical place, but a grounding feeling. That family can be built from the most unexpected, mismatched pieces. Assembled not by bloodline, but by choice, by simple kindness, by the singular decision to step in and help a stranger in need. Evan looked at the two sleeping girls, their hands still tightly intertwined, then at the remarkable woman beside him who had gone from unjustly accusing him of the worst crime to inviting him and his daughter into the intimate space of her home. He looked at the dying fire that had warmed them through an evening of unexpected connection. And he made himself a quiet, internal promise. Whatever this was, wherever it led, he would show up for it completely and wholly. The same way he showed up for Lily every single day. The same way he had instinctively shown up for Sophie in that crowded park on a winter night that now felt less like an ending, and more like the beginning of everything important. And across the room, still tightly clutching her new best friend's hand in her sleep, Lily smiled faintly at something in her dreams. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one very important thing. That Christmas was about finding the people who made you feel safe and loved, and holding on to them as tightly as you possibly could. Outside, the snow kept falling silently. Inside, for hearts beat together in a warmth filled with crooked snowflakes, imperfect potatoes, and the unmistakable, growing presence of family.